Good day, everyone, and warmly greetings from Geneva. On behalf of the International Jewish Committee of Interreligious Consultations and the Lutheran World Federation, I'd like to welcome you all to this public webinar on modern Jewish-Christian relations under the title Gathering Around the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life, a very important symbol in the Jewish-Christian traditions. I'm Reverend Rivka Schunk, Research Assistant in the Theology Unit of the LWF, and I'm very happy to give you some guidance to fully benefit from today's interfaith conversations. As a background, shortly, the Lutheran World Federation is a communion of 148 churches in 99 countries, and since the very beginning, 1947, the LWF started to engage in the Jewish-Christian dialogue. Even though there were some difficulties at the beginning, in the last 40 years, I would say, we are clearly on the way to a dialogue at eye level. With a clear rejection of any kind of anti-Semitism and with a new view on self-criticism when it comes to Luther's writings and theology. So this webinar today, together with the International Committee of Interreligious Consultations, or in short, IJCIC, is a milestone in this path. IJCIC represents the World Jury in dialogue with the Vatican, Ecumenical Patriarchate, and the WCC, and also now LWF. At the same time, it represents of major Jewish organizations and brings so together Jews from across denominations and areas of focus on a common cause. Today, the aim of our webinar is to renew and strengthen our Jewish-Lutheran relations and to reflect on its significance in these times of growing violence, polarization, and hostility worldwide. For example, the upcoming many conspiracy theories during the COVID time gave anti-Semitism a new public platform and are one of the reasons why this conversation today is important. I would like to invite our two first speakers to give us some opening remarks. First, we have Miss Eva Christina Nielsen. She is the director of the Theology Mission and Justice Department in LWF, and I'm very happy that she is there with us. You may start, Eva.
Thank you very much, Rivka, and a warm hello to all of you. And I want to start by saying, yes, today most churches and we all live in multi-faith contexts. Societies that used to be homogeneous, they are increasingly finding themselves becoming a mix of faith and non-faith traditions. And now in a time when more than 80 million people around the world are forcibly displaced, faith traditions will continue to find new homes. On the other hand, history reminds us that people have always been moving, and as new faith traditions find a home in new contexts, the search for cooperation and peaceful coexistence becomes inevitable. Tragically, we have also witnessed how religious communities are often caught in the middle of political conflict. Or in some cases, religious and political leaders have used theological reasons to justify hostile treatment of people of different faiths. In recent years, we observe the deeper complexity between religions and politics in the contemporary across the world. Sadly, we see how anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim, and anti-Christian polemics in different contexts are influencing the safety of people on the ground. We see, for example, in my home country, Sweden, how Jewish schools, synagogues, etc., need concrete protection. This is why interreligious dialogue, interfaith engagement, and peace building have been important for the Lutheran World Federation for a long time. And today, this focus is even more urgent, and we need to reclaim a proactive stance in encountering one another. In this webinar, our focus is on the person in front of us, or the person beside us or the one we will meet one day. We need to take a posture of humility and honesty as we listen and talk with one another. Our emphasis today is on the theological that goes beyond an academic interest, but the genuine interest in living out the meaning of loving our neighbor, and the inspiration from Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. The late Christer Stendahl, Lutheran bishop of the Diocese of Stockholm in Sweden and Dean of Harvard Divinity School, whom I had the privilege to work with together with for some years, he formulated 3 guiding principles for interfaith encounters, which I want to repeat. And number 1, let the other define him, herself. Don't do it on behalf of somebody else. And number 2, do not compare the best in your own tradition with the worst in the other's tradition. And number 3, find something with the other that you really envy. No tradition has the fullness. All traditions have something to contribute. These guiding principles are both simple and very useful. While some are building walls that separate people, this will not work in the long run. As human beings, we are mutually interdependent, and we need to see the image of God in every person. And as we renew our conversation between Jews and Lutherans, both at the global and grassroots level, I hope that this modest attempt today will encourage all people of faith and non-faith to recognize each other's human dignity. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it brings many challenges. There is not a single model, but as the Lutheran World Federation, we are committed to continue supporting our member churches in their life and witness in multi-faith contexts. We are encouraged by this collaboration with partners like the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations to further our joint commitment in working for a more just, peaceful, and reconciled world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva Christina. These were really important aspects of this topic. And now, on the second hand, I would like to invite Rabbi Dr. Joseph Karnowski to give us his opening address. He's the rabbi of the Keilat Sha'arei Torah, an influential modern Orthodox synagogue in Toronto. And what I personally found very interesting, that he also was a teaching fellow for Professor Elie Wiesel. You will find more information in the chat because we will, for the continuing webinar, we will do so to put all the bias in the chat, so we will have a fluent webinar here. So now, Rabbi Joe, you have the word.
Thank you, Rivka. Honored participants, it's my pleasure to be part of introducing our conversation today, and I express my appreciation to the organizers for asking me to speak. Let me invite you to step back with me 40 years to a small church in the suburbs of America, Mount Cross Lutheran Church in Tacoma, Washington, on the west coast of the United States. My mother and I led a discussion around a model Passover Seder for the congregants of Mount Cross, who included my scout leader, my baseball coach, and one of my lifelong best friends, among others that I knew from that community where I spent my childhood. Conversations like these were important to my mom for the length of her days, and she passed that value on to me. In thinking back to that morning in the church basement, I cannot recall a single question anyone asked, nor any particular point that we expressed. What I do recall with clarity and immediacy is the friendship, the goodwill, mutual respect, and genuine interest in others who shared faith, though not precisely the same faith. And although for me, I draw a direct line from that morning as a teenager to this morning as your colleague, discussant, and hopefully friend, now and in the future, I confess a certain degree of challenge, keeping faith with a similar trajectory for our society. Our times, sad to say, are times of cancel culture, calling out the mistakes and oversights of the other, whether real or perceived. With the rise of social media and digital communication, which so easily enable us to share insights and reflections on themes of ultimate reality and supreme importance, we live daily with the effects of disinformation and misinformation, the pernicious spread of old and new hatreds and resentments, and the heightened ability to injure the souls of others faster, further, and much more efficiently than ever before in human history. Thankfully, our age also sees any number of conservationist causes in our world. There are those who strive to save the oceans, to save species of animals from extinction, to save the ozone layer, to preserve this precious planet, which its creator has entrusted to us so generously. I will humbly and respectfully suggest that this group assembled here today can offer the world conservation of another and perhaps even more rare and valuable kind. We can, if we choose, model and project humanity. I suggest to you that among the world's most scarce resources today is kindness. As people of faith, we appreciate the kindness and generosity and grace that Almighty God has given us with an open hand, and we do our best to pay it forward, to share it. As with so many of God's gifts, our giving and sharing of kindness and friendship and tolerance and understanding only increases those gifts in the world. It does not deplete them. For a person of faith, there are many temptations. Among these are righteous indignation and righteous zealotry, which lead us to condemn others, to judge others, diminish others. Let our conversation today and into the future be the more challenging and ultimately more holy righteousness, righteous generosity, righteous kindness, righteous humility. Since we all agree that establishing God's peace on earth is really what we're here for, perhaps we can agree on how to share the task as well. I, for one, am very much looking forward to listening and discussing with an open mind, an open heart, and a generous eye. A song that my father used to sing to me when he would put me to bed when I was small was from Psalm 133. How good it is and how pleasant for brethren to dwell together in unity. Hine ma tov u'manayim sheves achim gam yachad. May these words of King David inspire and uplift and motivate us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Joe. These really are interesting thoughts and requests also to our conversation. So now we will continue to our panel, and therefore I pass over to Reverend Sivan Kidd. He is the Program Executive for Public Theology and Interreligious Relations in the LWF. Thank you.
Thank you, Rivka, for just opening up our session today. And thank you also, Eva Christina and Joe, for just giving us the opening remarks. I think this sets the tone for our conversation today. So my name is Sivan Kidd. I'm from Malaysia, now based in Geneva with the Lutheran World Federation. And I'm going to invite all the panelists to just come forward so that they can be ready for this conversation together. And we won't go through too long of introduction for each of them. But what we wanted to do is that there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us on the screen to have this conversation with one another. Now, I'll introduce all the speakers as I prompt them afterwards, one by one. And of course, we will have a couple of questions to get us going. For those of you who are joining us today, you can use the chat just to react to us, or if you have a particular question, use the Q&A box so that it will help us to have it all organized in one spot. And really, this is a very important occasion for us to renew this conversation starting off with Jewish voices and Lutheran voices coming together. But also we have Dr. Leo from Indonesia joining us as well. And he's from the Reformed tradition, and it'll be a very enriching experience. But first, let me introduce the first person, Rabbi Tama Elad Applebaum. I hope I got your name correct. And if you Google her, you will realize that she's someone who is very who finds it important to talk about spirituality, and she brings this very strong perspective into our conversation. But let's just start the conversation going. Like, what would be some of the challenges or even the opportunities that you see in this conversation? Maybe I would just start off with you first.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sivan. And I want to thank Reverend Rivka and Reverend Eve and Rabbi Joe and Rabbi David and all the people here, just seeing the names and seeing where each one comes from and looking at this panel of incredible leaders, which I really look up to, and I want to listen and know and hopefully come closer. It's a very important moment. I want to start with Rabbi Joe speaking about his mother and about his father. And I want to say that this is a very incredible tradition to come from a family of guardians of the friendship between human beings. To have a mother and a father teaching their children to believe and to trust each other. And I want to go back to the topic that you chose, Reverend Sivan, the topic called the Tree of Life. I remember until today, Rabbi Jonathan Perlman, the rabbi of one of the congregations where 3 of the Pittsburgh shooting were killed. And speaking with him not long after, I asked him what kind of prayer is he writing right now to God. And he said that he is writing a prayer for friendship. And the end of the prayer are the words, Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And I found it incredible to be a son of a culture that anciently, but very relevantly today, speaks of oneness, speaks that all of us are children of one God, and that our duty is to bring the people together to the Tree of Life, even in the most difficult moment of all. I think one of the obstacles is the question, do we have teachers who bring us closer to the Tree of Life? Do we have parents of all kinds and sorts who bring us closer to the Tree of Life? Do we have friends that we know from the Lutheran world and the Muslim world and all around that bring us closer to the Tree of Life? Because you see, in Jewish tradition, the very word life, chaim in Hebrew, is in the plural. You cannot have a Tree of Life which is in the singular. It cannot belong to one religion. It cannot belong to one people. It belongs to all people, to all creatures created by God. And I think that the Tree of Life is a point of conference, just like we are creating today, where people meet. But too many people do not have leaders who bring them together and closer. So I think the biggest obstacle and the biggest challenge is to raise in this world leaders who have friends from different religions and denominations, and they are true friends. When a Jewish boy comes to this world, we greet him and we say, Asher kidesh yadid mi beten, may you be a friend in the world, in the sanctity of the world of God. Working on friendship is the biggest obstacle in a world that is full of people in haste, in competition. And our role as leaders is to slow the world and bring people closer. I would say the second biggest challenge is despair. People in our world after COVID, especially young people, are in despair. It's not always about Christians or Jews or Muslims. It's about faith. It's about trust. Do we trust life? Is there a point in life? Is there a destiny for human beings? Many of them do not believe in togetherness anymore. And one of the gifts that leaders of faith bring to the world is believing not only in the one, but specifically in the many, and the us in coming together. We could create that kind of trust only when we create a picture of together. So one of the greatest challenges in our time is to create that kind of a picture, standing against despair with a picture of hope, of a real tree of life where people come together. Lastly, I want to say that here in Jerusalem, we're on our way to the Day of Jerusalem. The Day of Jerusalem is a very good example for a day that could bring people apart, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, or bring us together. It is upon us, each one of us and all leaders, to find these places where we tend the tree of life, when we make sure that its roots are deep, that the friendship is close, that it's seen from very far away to all those who look for it, and they have a picture of hope. And I hope that today we start slowly coming back to this garden of the tree of life, standing around it, plowing it, making sure it grows high, and many people are invited in all our congregations to come together, to know and have friends from the Lutheran and Jewish world, to ask each other questions, and also to be able to create moments of hope, moments of togetherness in a world speaking very too much about the individual and the competition between them.
Thank you. And I thought it would be good to just introduce everyone at one go, then we can just pursue the conversation. So Rabbi Tamar is the founder of Zion and Israeli community in Jerusalem, among many other things. And of course, we also have Rabbi David Sandmel, Rabbi Dr. David Sandmel, who is the chair of the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Relations, USA. We have Professor Esther Mann, who is the Dean of Academic Affairs, the Ralph W. and Marilyn R. Klein Professor of Old Testament / Hebrew Bible at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, USA. Dr. Jacob Wirren, the Associate Professor at Lund University and Theological Advisor of Archbishop Antje Jacqueline Church of Sweden. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Leonard Chrysostomos Epaphoras. He's the faculty and researcher of the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies. So with that out of the way, and Rivka, you can post all their bios in the chat so that people can get to know them. But I think we're here to listen to them. And Jacob, I like to just swing over all the way to Sweden right now, because I know you have written on hospitality, you have written on inter-religious solidarity, among other things, as well as making sure that this is rooted in the experiences of local religious actors and communities. So as you hear this first question about the challenges and opportunities, what would you say?
Thank you so much for inviting me also. Well, I mean, as a Lutheran theologian, I would say that one of the challenges is the fact that this anti-Judaistic supersessionist theology is so deeply embedded in the Lutheran way of thinking and preaching. There has historically been, and still sometimes there is a close relationship between, on the one hand, Christian worship, and on the other hand, anti-Judaism, where Christians have portrayed Jews as the prologue of God's work, something that was necessary but no longer is. They have been portrayed as the contrast, the dark background against which the bright Christian story shines clearer. I mean, the gospel versus the law, and freedom versus rigidity, and so on. And also Judaism and Jews as scapegoats, Cain but not Abel, Judas but not Peter, and so on. And I think that this is an historic challenge, but it is also still, it remains a challenge for Christian theology in general and for Lutheran theology in particular to work with. But I also see, I mean, promising opportunities. I think that the knowledge about this anti-Jewish legacy in the Christian tradition is really increasing, and it is so on a large scale. And I also find that the level of self-criticism and the motivation for moving further among the established churches in the world is high. So that is, and also on the academic level, a lot of work is going on, and I think that is something that has to be going on all the time. And you mentioned also, that's my final point, I think. You mentioned also the fact that I've been studying local interfaith work, and we see there that the practical, I mean, of course, that kind of work is on another level, but that practical work where Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, they join hands and together they fight anti-Semitism, Christophobia, Islamophobia, and so on. That work, I think, together with the theological work, is a strong and promising opportunity to renew not only the Jewish Lutheran, but also the interfaith relations around the world.
Thank you, Jacob. And David, you are a veteran in this field of interreligious dialogue. You're a veteran in Jewish-Christian conversations and so forth. What do you see as distinctive about this conversation from your perspective? Just now, Jacob talked about these words that we hear, whether it's Islamophobia, Christophobia, anti-Semitism. There's also these political dimensions that, of course, we cannot totally ignore. But at the same time, we don't want to be just dragged into just merely dealing with politics, but there's more than that. Do you have any thoughts about the distinctiveness of this conversation that we are having right now?
Well, I would point to several things. First of all, Jacob mentioned himself this issue of self-awareness and self-critique. So we are coming to this conversation not at the very beginning of relations between Jews and Christians writ large, or Jews and Lutherans, but we're coming after several generations have been working on this very clearly. The organization that I chair, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations, has met with the LWF as early as 1983, almost 40 years ago, and put out a document. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has a statement on Jewish-Lutheran relations and has talking points on Jewish-Lutheran relations, wonderful documents, wonderful resources. And so there's a lot of good history, I think, between Lutherans and Jews, and more broadly between Christians and Jews. And I think I want to start with that, because that's the foundation of what we're doing here today. That's what motivated the outreach that between Sivan, between you and me and Reverend Burkhardt earlier in the year, that in a sense reinvigorated this conversation. And I think that we need to start with the positive. Because that, if we forget that, to borrow a phrase from a Catholic colleague, we risk falling into a dialogue of grievance. And that's not where I want to go. That having been said, I do think it's important to recognize that challenges still remain in terms of work that needs to be done within the Lutheran world and more broadly. And some of it, I think, has to do with teaching. What is being taught around the world in Lutheran seminaries, in Lutheran churches? What is being preached from the pulpit? Has the message, in a sense, gotten down to the local parish level, especially in places where there isn't a large Jewish community? And I'm heartened today to see the geographic breadth of our audience here. It's really moving and impressive to me to see people literally from all over the world, from every continent, joining in this conversation. One of the things that I think has happened in Jewish-Christian relations is that there is, I think, much more positive feeling from Christians towards Jews today than there was 3, 4, 10 generations ago. But I also think that there can be a bit of a disconnect. And that disconnect is between Jews as they appear in the Gospels, in the New Testament, and so forth, and Jews as people's neighbors in the world today. And so I think sometimes Christians who would never say anything negative about their neighbors and would protect their neighbors, God forbid, if need be, and so forth, don't always recognize that talking about the Pharisees in negative terms, or talking about the priesthood or the temple, or they don't know that there's a disconnect between those Jews in antiquity and their Jews today. And I think that's something that we need to connect. And I think we also need to understand that for Jews, some of this language has less to do with the theology behind it or the philosophy behind it. It has more to do with almost a visceral emotional impact. I like to analogize this to the concept of triggering. If someone who has been through a traumatic experience, if they hear a sound or a smell or words, or, it will trigger an emotional response. And I think that sometimes happens as well. And I also would say that it's important to say that within the Jewish community, we need to learn more about our Christian neighbors writ large, and we need to learn more specifically again about our Lutheran neighbors. I think many Jews, the only thing they know about Luther are, the facts about some of his less edifying, shall we say, writings, which have been repudiated by the LWF, by the ELCA, but that's what Jews know. They don't know, unfortunately, about the progress that has been made. So I think that that's one of the things that is incumbent on our community. Yes, we have to be vigilant. We have to call out problems when we see them, but we also have to acknowledge the significant changes that have taken place and the friendships, both personal and institutional, that have emerged. Let me stop there. You don't want to give a rabbi a microphone.
It's either you give a rabbi or a pastor. It's the same thing. I think we can relate to that. But of course, we know of your friendship with Esther, and you have worked together. And I think that's a good segue into just inviting Esther to start sharing about what are your thoughts. Now, Esther is also the chairperson for the Jewish-Christian Relations Study Document Task Force that I'm also part of, coordinating together with her. And recently, we've been spending some very enriching moments just among Lutherans to self-reflect on our own journey and how we can encourage Lutherans around the world to reflect deeper in this. So Esther, well, I'll just pass the time to you to just react to this opening remarks and questions, and even what you have heard from Tamar and David, as well as Jacob.
Yes, thank you so much for this invitation and for this rich gathering of people. I think that this is one of the opportunities we have really to foster study and learning about where we are. Certainly, we have come a long way, and yet we are in a polarized society, as we've seen in some of these horrific incidents. But we've also had responses, which has been wonderful. For example, show up for Shabbat here in the States after the Tree of Life shooting. And that was very inspiring. We had 30 people go to a local synagogue here, and it was so appreciated. So yes, we have a long way to go to address our situation, whether it be these explicit acts and desecrations and so forth, or whether it be centuries of kind of reflexive thinking about Judaism by Christians and by Lutherans. And so we need more education. We need more guidance about preaching and teaching with love and respect for our Jewish neighbors. And that's one thing that we need to focus on as our project, to persist in correcting our past and refining our theology and teaching our leaders and people and strengthening actual relationships with Jewish individuals and communities. This is so important to create a very durable network that we can rely on when we have times of stress and we need a response. This is relatively new, less than a century really, of rethinking, radically rethinking the relationship between Jews and Christians. So I take hope in how far we've come, and yet I look forward to the next generations of work. Now, if I could just say two more things very briefly. The situation in the Middle East really impacts Jewish-Christian relations. And we can't grow up. We can't grow cynical, but always seek greater understanding. I've come to understand how deeply divided the Jewish community is among matters related to Israel and politics, and that just increases the complexity and our need to really listen very deeply, and to grow our capacity for complexity and for giving dignity and respect to all parties, and working towards justice together and for peace together. And then the last challenge that I want to address is that I see a shift away from concentrating on Jewish-Christian relations to more interreligious relations. And that is a natural move, but I would really like to raise up among this next generation people that have knowledge and sensitivity and specialization in Jewish-Christian relations, because we do have a unique relationship between Christians and Jews. And so we need to foster those leaders that are going to be able to articulate and to develop those relations in the future. Thank you,
Esther. Really appreciate that. Adding on to what we have said, we have heard thus far. Now, in one of the questions is really interesting. Someone raised this old writings from the church fathers, Chrysostom's dispute against the Jews. Now, that's very interesting because the last person I'm going to ask has that name there in his name, Leonard Chrysostomos. And when I first met him, I was actually quite intrigued to know of my Indonesian Christian colleague who is studying religious studies, who actually focus on Jewish studies from Indonesia, which is very rare, I think, in our part of the world. So I think many of us would be curious, of course, maybe your reaction to that question, because you are not against the Jews in a sense today, carrying that name, but you're someone who wants to seek to understand. And maybe you can share with us from your experience, especially coming from Indonesia and what you have observed both personally and in your research. Can you share with us some of your insights into these challenges and opportunities from your perspective? Leonard, Leo, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen, and happy to join in this very fine conversation. Of course, I try to catch on the urgency of this conversation to combating anti-Semitism and refreshing the Christian-Jewish relationships that has been started from after the World War II and somehow become I don't know what is the English expression, is not that much as far as my understanding, as far as my learning. Yes, I will start with my name. My name is Chrysostomos. That's bearing the historical burden and traumatic for many of you are Jewish. That John the Chrysostom, for you that's not really aware of that, is I think one of the Christian church fathers that's truly have a strong anti-Semitic leaning or anti-Judaism, anti-Judaic leaning. So somehow, my father gave the name to me is simply to have envision a larger than life kind of contribution of me to the world. So hopefully my name is and my work is a kind of minor redemption to the problem in the past. Well, okay, I have several issues, but I will try to make it a squeeze because of time limitation. I just want to highlight that because the title of this discussion is Tree of Life, and in my understanding is a menorah. So I just published in Indonesian, unfortunately, an article about Jewish Sufism, the interaction between Jews and Muslims in the past in the discourse of Sufism. The title of the article is that every tree rooted in the sky. It coming from Sufism insights. That's we learn that's our source of spirituality in fact, is a single source of spirituality that we can learn from each other, and we can boost to our conversation through that. Yeah, it is interesting. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, and is probably, you may expect that's because of the tension between Jews and Muslims, especially especially because of the issue of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that we can expect that Indonesia is very much anti-Jewish, which is in the larger part is true, but it's much more nuanced. And I think I'm happy that Indonesian is moving to a more diverse understanding of Jews. And I learned that there is a new Islamic Jewish Christian understanding organization named Rahim Foundations. Even though Jewish community in Indonesia is micro-minority, it's very, very complicated. They are micro-minority, and I don't know, Jews, as Esther mentioned, is very divided, and they are very small, but they already divided from different perspective, and they challenge to each other about what is the true Jewish identity. Mihu Yehudi is there all the time. Mihu Yehudi question. So, but at the same time, we also testify the raising of Philo-Semites and Christian Zionists among Indonesian Christians. That I don't know whether you're aware of that. For example, we have the largest menorah statue, 60 feet menorah, much larger than Knesset's menorah. And we have Holocaust Museum in North Sulawesi province. North Sulawesi is the predominantly Protestant province. So yes, Philo-Semitism for me is complicated. We cannot say this is a good thing at all situation, but I think it can take as a social capital we can work on in the future, because they are now a more Christian that understand more about Jewish, not only from the Bible perspective, but from the Holocaust history, from the pogrom history, and so on. Especially in my class, I teach Judaism in my class, and I also invited Muslim students to enjoy my class, and then I talking about pogrom and so on and so forth, Holocaust, and long historical discrimination in Christendom, and so on and so forth. And then, and also among the Muslims, they are raising a more, a more curiosity. I think curiosity is important, especially because Indonesia doesn't have post or Holocaust burden. So I think it's an important movement, even though on the other side, there's a very strong anti-Semitic tones in public sphere and in the public media, especially last year, May, Gaza conflict that's again make the issue of anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism is heated in the public space. So I think that's pretty much the new development of Indonesian perspective of Jewish, and I hope that this information we can work and expose there in the future and work with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. So we've kind of spent some time to have some opening remarks, but actually these opening remarks already has a lot of depth in different layers. And Dharma, you have been so patient. You started off just starting us going, but I think I should give you a priority of just reacting to what you have heard from our colleagues. And what are one or two particular things that struck you, especially listening to Leo also from Indonesia, is quite a new angle in this conversation. But of course, we move on because we're basically sharing that we will get to some of the questions afterwards that people have posed. But maybe do you have some immediate reactions to what you have heard thus far? Maybe one or two things that has captured your attention, whether it's listening to David or whom you know well, as well as other colleagues here. Tamara, any thoughts?
First, I want to say this is fascinating because we heard so many reflections on this moment in history. Rabbi David choosing to speak about all the process that has been done, and it's a theological choice. I want to even say theology that overcomes history. And I think it's a very big moment for all of us to be able to create that, to really choose to be believers, to really choose to be people, women and men and leaders of faith in this moment. And on the other hand, to hear Jacob speaking about history and to really give it place and significance, acknowledging text, acknowledging our ability to interpret text, our ability to choose between texts, how to teach, what not to teach or not to emphasize, how to look at ourselves with self-criticize, and how to look at the other and be able to speak about it in order to be guardians of the world. And I think this is an incredible moment of completion, to be able to see those voices coming together. And this is exactly the kind of conversation that so many of us need. And I want to second, Esther, what you said about the fact that this is not, it is on the one hand, I would say, a new kind of parenting in the world. I think parenting in many ways is attacked these days. The greater parent, God, and the question if there is a God, and many people diminishing that question or putting it aside. Also the question of different parents and parenting in the world, but I think there's a missing lineage of parents of faith and peace. And those like Rabbi Joe, who had these kinds of parents, I know many others here received that blessing from God, but I think we are public parents. And public parenting is something that you do in text, in language, in your own unique identity, in knowing other identities, but especially in modeling, in behavior, in local behavior that shows a picture of how the world could look like. And I want to second what Jacob said about the local work. And I want to say that I just want to give it as an example. I grew up in Jerusalem in a very Orthodox, traditional Jewish world, never meeting Christians of any kind. As a rabbi today, it's one of my biggest duties in the world to make sure that my congregants, that our community of Zion here in Jerusalem really meets and has friendships, serious friendships with others. And I see this as one of the most significant tests of my leadership. And I want to say that I see so many leaders all around the world creating a new kind of parenting, overcoming through theology our history. And so much information, Leo, that you brought in regarding Indonesia that I had not known and never heard. This is such an important historic moment for me and theological moment for me to hear so many of your reflections, even to hear that for you, the Tree of Life is the menorah, and that you have a higher menorah than the one here in Israel in the Knesset at the government mountain. That's astonishing, and that's beautiful. And I want to say about that menorah, going with you, Leo, and with your reflection on the Tree of Life, that if the Tree of Life is the menorah, and it needs the light of us all, then guarding and being the guardians of the Tree of Life has the places of darkness, which we have to guard and guard ourselves from, and has the places of light. And how do you create a world in which you stand against darkness of so many kinds that we have within our societies and we have all around? I think the only way is by lighting light. And so exercising parenting, exercising local work with which the people of our congregations see how you light in the midst of darkness one candle. Sometimes that's all we need. I think this is the biggest gift God can give his believers, to just light one candle. And so I think that this conversation is about identifying darkness. How do we identify the danger of darkness? And also about how do we create tools of light. And how do we make sure that it's high up in Indonesia? You could see that menorah from there until here. How do we make it known? So I think one of the last things I want to say is many times people of faith are very humble. And I think the language of faith needs to be heard as much as possible. And many times it has to be heard together, because that picture of the tree of life lit by many candles makes a very big difference. And I think that when locally people speak of the way they light in action different candles, that makes a very big difference in the world. And I hope for all of us that 50 years from now, many people will be able to say, these were my parents. These were the people who taught me, who showed me how to do. This is what I did in my city in Indonesia, in Kansas, in Jerusalem, in different places, and be able to recreate the lineage of healing the world, of creating hope in the world through action, local action in our world.
Thank you so much. Now, from the comments and the Q&A, we already see that this gathering is really quite intercultural, international, and also quite grassroots. And there are some interesting questions, and I'll pose it to my two Lutheran colleagues. We'll let Leo just rest a while, and also David, others, and I'll let both of them decide who wants to respond to this. There's a very interesting question, actually, simple, straightforward. Do Lutherans, us, or leaders and average churchgoers, and some of you can probably give your answers in the chat, expect something in particular from Jews, Jewish friends, and Jews in general, and Israelis? This is one question. Now, is there an expectation? I mean, we talked about our expectation on ourselves to be self-critical, to be self-aware and all that. So I just want, this person is asking that very pointed question to Lutherans. What would you say to that? It could be Esther or Jacob, any of you. Looks like Jacob, you're ready.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I guess that's a question that has several answers. But I think that both Rabbi Joe and Tamar in their responses, they've been highlighting the importance of, on the one hand, kindness, and on the other hand, friendship. And I think those two together are really a key to moving forward. And I think, and I hope that if there is any special thing that Lutherans are seeking from Jewish friends and colleagues, it is that kind of friendship that I think is a key also to overcoming this past that we have.
And just before I go back to Esther, there was a thought that came in my mind or in some conversations. And David, I thought you might be a good person. I'll come back to you, Esther, later. Do you feel, as someone engaged in this conversation for all these years, that sometimes Lutherans might come across too apologetic? That no, we're always like, we'll say, okay, Luther said some really nasty things, and so there's always that immediate qualifier. What do you say to that? Or in a sense, what would you expect from Lutherans as we move forward, turning that question around? And then we'll let Esther have the final say on this.
Well, I would start by quoting the prophet Ezekiel, who said, that it used to be taught that the parents ate sour grapes and the teeth of the children were set on edge. It had to do with inheriting sin. And then it goes on to say each person is responsible for their own sins. So I think that it is extraordinarily important for Lutherans to acknowledge the problems of the past, to confront the problems of the past. And as I mentioned before, especially to look at how these things are being taught. Again, especially in seminaries, to leaders who are then going to go out and teach and preach. I think that that's very important, but I also think that it's unfair to blame people today for things that were done in the past by others. We need to maintain that. Excuse me. We need to maintain that balance. So I guess that would be a short answer to your question.
Thank you, David. Very helpful. Esther, what are your thoughts, expectations on Jewish friends and on ourselves?
That's very helpful. Your questions, Ivan, and David's answer were very enlightening. I was also going to say that I believe when Lutherans in particular come to know the more shameful side of Martin Luther's writings, they are shocked because it's a founding figure that's always celebrated, especially on Reformation Day. So to see this other side and realize that our tradition is complicit and actually, has been sort of held up as, oh, this is sort of a summary of Christian anti-Semitism. There's this kind of guilt and shame. And so I feel that the kindness and friendship and acceptance of the Jewish partners and friends is like so important in reestablishing a positive relationship. So that's one thing. And that's a kind of a burden on our Jewish friends, who have been hurt by this history. But I'd say it's an asymmetrical relationship in another way, in that as Christians learn how much our roots really are within Judaism, that we want to know more. We're very curious. So we want to meet Jews and learn more about Judaism and so forth. And that's also a high expectation. There's not that many Jews in the world or in the community. So we have to understand and appreciate all the friendship and warmth that we have received. So thank you to our Jewish friends.
And to the panelists, you all could have a look at the questions as well in the Q&A. Feel free to pick out anything that you would like to speak on. I know, Jacob, you would like to continue.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to add on what Esther just said. I mean, we were talking about Chrysostomos earlier, and the fact that not only he, but most of the early Christian theologians throughout history had a work against Judaism in some way. So the identity struggle of the early church was to a large extent aimed against the Jewish tradition. From the beginning, perhaps it was understandable. It was a question of identity, but it never ceased. And I think that sometimes in interfaith relationships, one says that we should not be afraid of differences. We should allow differences. And I think that is a wise thing to say. But in the Christian Jewish tradition, I think that we should also say that we should not be afraid of similarities. I mean. Eva Christina quoted Christer Stendahl earlier, and he pointed out so nicely, I think, that there is a familiar shape to God's ways with the world. We should rejoice rather than be afraid of the analogous shape of Passover and Easter, of Akedah and Golgotha, Sinai and the Sermon on the Mount, and so on. So these similarities are also something that we should honor rather than be afraid of.
Thank you. And as you comb through some of the questions, would any of you in the panelists feel like picking up one particular? I think there's one here that's probably interesting. Is the distinction between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism important? Because Leo, you used the word just now in your remarks, historically and in the present. Maybe it'd be interesting to hear from you first, Leo, and then others could just chip in as well. And of course, there are other dimensions in the Q&A that others could pick up. Leo, over to you.
Thank you very much. Probably there's more authority, Rabbi David and Rabbi Tamar, to speak about that. I'm just reflecting from my own work, especially because in Indonesian context, there's a lot of nuances. We not reflecting that much about the anti-Semitism from Europe, even though we are very much colonized by Dutch most of the time, but we are very much contextual. We Indonesian Christians develop contextual theology that doesn't really think much. Their Jewish understanding mostly coming from the European, and simply, I'm not saying simply, but it's very much reflecting the nominal anti-Semitic understanding. Christianity is the final, is the replacement of the Jewish people, and so on and so forth. But again, I mentioned about the emergence of philo-Semitisms, then the challenge is, in fact, is coming from, I learned from the Sigmund Bauman understanding of Jews from the European perspective is non-historical, ahistorical people, and that's kind of framework is also appear in Indonesian context, in which what so-called Jew, Zionism, Israel all put lump into together, so it's understood in the same way, in the same plane, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think anti-Judaism is basically anti toward Judaism as a religious system, especially if you reflecting to, or it is manifesting in your interpretation to the Bible, to the New Testament, especially Gospel of John. Anti-Jews is much more social, political issue, is about antagonism toward Jews as ethnicity, as even as something abstract that's become the problem of the world, something like that. And in Indonesia, I also mentioned about anti-Israelism. That's yeah, we don't have enough and sufficient understanding about Jews and those connection with Israel, but Israel is the real and something that can clearly you attack or you love to. Again, philo-Semites and Christian Zionists is so love to Israel. But both anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, anti-Israelisms are portray Jews as a non-historical entity, as an ahistorical people. And for Indonesian Christians, it's simply connected to the Bible Israelites. That's why in certain group of Indonesian Christians, they connect to the Isaiah prophecy about the faraway islands, and the faraway islands is Indonesia, and Indonesia is the starting point of Eastern Gate, according to the prophecy of Isaiah. So they connect that real politics in the Middle East through the Bible eyes, which is in fact is not surprising, but the way they connect to the Bible prophecy is truly interesting for me. I think that's I try to make it short. Thank you.
I think thank you for these challenging, complicated, and often needing nuanced discussions. It's not easy to keep it short because there's so many layers that we want to pull through. Now, I think there is quite a bit of energy for us to continue, but we won't keep it too long. I'd like to just maybe invite our panelists to maybe have some closing remarks. You can pick on some of the questions that our participants have given. And one of them is interesting because this person draws on the New Testament image also of the Tree of Life in the book of Revelation, which often people see as an apocalyptic, doomsday kind of book. But there is this phrase that says the Tree of Life whose leaves are for the healing of the nation. And we are trying to engage in a dialogue that also talks about peace, justice, and reconciliation. And this is what the LWF works toward for. And so I just wonder, what are some things that our panelists would like to say? It's just some closing comments. Anyone can just jump in of what are your hopes after today, especially for the future of this renewal of Jewish-Christian relations. We can't answer all the questions here, of course, but we'll collect them so that it will also inform the work of our Jewish-Christian study document as well. So for participants, please feel free if you want to just switch and put your questions into the chat. That's most helpful for us to have a record as well. If you can give your insight or a question, just throw it in the chat rather than the Q&A, then others can also see it if you don't mind. But just some closing remarks on just what are your hopes for the future and what inspires you as you move forward, and maybe perhaps a practical or theological point that you would like to emphasize as the most important for you. So maybe we'll go back to our David to get this going.
Well, this has been a very rich conversation, and there are some very deep and provocative questions in the Q&A list. Some of them from some good friends of mine, and I wish that we had time to address all of them. I do want to say a word about the question that talked about dialogue and perhaps a reticence in dialogue to be completely open, and to having dialogue affect us in some ways, and I think that is a reality. I think it is especially a reality, perhaps more for Jews than for Christians in Jewish-Christian dialogue, because of the sense of history, because of numbers. You know, there are, I think over 2 billion Christians in the world, and maybe 14 to 15 million Jews, 77.5 million Lutherans, according to your LWF website. You know, in all relationships, I think the concern about how much do I open up? How much am I willing to be challenged? These are things that happen in all relationships. I also think that we have, historically, I think that we have ignored the way that each of our traditions and our interactions between the traditions have affected the other, not only in sort of biblical times, but even throughout history up to today. Again, both positively and negatively. And I think that looking at both of those is extraordinarily important. Just speaking very personally, based on my own life story and my experiences, I don't see how I would be the person that I have become, again, for better or for worse, without the various experiences I have had in interreligious relations, the teachers I've had, the colleagues that I've worked with, both in the Jewish community and in the broader community. And again, not just Christians, but Muslims and others as well. So in all honesty, do I sometimes feel that I need to be defensive, that I need to set boundaries and say, you know, here I will go, but here I will not go? Certainly. I'm not interested in changing my religion, but I'm certainly interested in growing in my understanding of myself, of my understanding of the other, and of the understanding of my tradition. And if, you know, the Mishnah says that the wise person is someone who can learn from anyone. And learning, I think I would, you know, again, I keep using this phrase, writ large, not just facts and figures and so forth, but also deep learning, depth learning about myself and who I am in the universe. So.
Thank you. I'll just jump straight to David, and then afterwards it will be Esther, Leonard, and we'll let Tama have the last word. So just a short summary, some of your final words as we close this segment, and then I'll pass it to Rabbi Josh. But Jacob, over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Or Esther, go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. I just want to say theologically, it's because of my faith that I'm involved in interreligious dialogue, and with emphasis on Jewish-Christian relations, because I have a confidence that God's working in us and through us to address many of our difficult aspects of our past and repair our history, to bring us together and to build mutual and respectful relationships, and to teach us how to take delight in each other and in each other's differences, as well as in those things we have in common, because we know that God also delights in our diversity and is our creator.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this rich conversation.
Jacob, how about you?
Thank you so much. So many things that one would like to comment on. Perhaps I should say something about Amy Gill's very, very good question in the Q&A, where she mentions, I mean, the situation of pastors and ministers and so on. And my impression from the Church of Sweden is that pastors and ministers not paying attention to the Christian-Jewish dialogue easily slip into caricatures of the Pharisees or negative perceptions of the Jewish law and so on. And I mean, we know that these kind of things matters, that theology matters, and the way we think of and talk of each other matters. And I think that the systematic theological training is particularly when it comes to sermons and so on, is something that is important and that we need to work systematically with. So that's one thing. I mean, theology can't do it all, but it certainly has a contribution to this work.
And before I go to Tamar as for final words, Leo, as an Indonesian Christian listening to all this, what is one thing you'd like to say to us?
Thank you very much. Two things. I think Indonesia needs more exposure to Jewish people to Jewish engagement. So I think that's I'm envisioning the larger engagement with Jewish people. And I just want to inform you all that I'm in the middle of a project with other people to translate the Book of Children of Abraham from my teacher, Rabbi Ruben Firestone, into Indonesian. It's hopefully can give a more larger exposure to Indonesian about Jewish issues. The second thing, I tried to respond to the question about Israeli-Palestinian. I don't have the final word. I don't have final answer. It's very complicated, but I always emphasize on the people who truly pursue peace, Rodfei Shalom. That's people like Shorashim institution. I truly inspired by the late Rabbi Menachem Froman. And I also talking about Aharon, because Aaron, because Harun is also part of Islamic tradition, as recognized by Talmud as Rodef Shalom, person who pursue Shalom. So I think that's two things I want to share with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with those words, Shalom, we come back to you, the opening words that you started off with, Tamar. What would you like to say as closing remarks?
Thank you so much. I want to say, as a rabbi in Jerusalem, that I feel the world is very sick. It just went through COVID, and so many people have died or been hurt by it. And the planet is very, very sick, the earth and the birds and the nations and many countries and religions for many years have been, many times, too often, a part of the collective trauma. And they were meant to be part of the collective healing. They are the language of God to create a collective healing, and we have been blessed to hear the language, to learn the language, to speak the language, to teach the language. So it is our duty, as long as we live on the earth and we connect to its people and to its human, to really build these bridges between us of collective healing. There is so much trauma in the personal level, but I think being able to quietly and kindly, but also truthfully, look at the wrongdoings and make a tshuva and fix the world. To Jews, that is the highest form and level of worshiping God, when we fix things, when we hear the call of God to fix them. So I see this conversation as the highest call and the highest listening to the word of God that we want to fix. And we know we have what to fix amongst ourselves, each religion, but we also know about the others. But more importantly, one who fixes is one who believes. And I think this is a conversation of belief. And now, knowing that there is a Tree of Life in Indonesia, I want to say that each one of these windows is a tree of life. And behind each one of these windows, there's a community and a congregation or a family that is committed to light the light of collective healing. And I wish for all of us from Jerusalem that God will hear our prayers and our efforts and help us be the guardians of the Tree of Life.
Thank you very much to all our speakers for this. We extended the time a little bit because I felt that energy level was pretty good and our participants were still lasting quite well for the whole time. And it just shows that there's strong interest and commitment towards this process. Not ignoring the challenges, of course, as you have all stated, either through questions or through your remarks, but also knowing that we have resources within our traditions and learning from one another to move forward. So thank you once again for your contribution. And I'd like to invite, say goodbye to all the panelists, and I'd like to invite Rabbi Josh Stanton to come. And Josh, I'd like to pass the time to you to just give us some closing remarks and word of thanks. So over to you, Josh.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for those beautiful reflections. A couple of thoughts about what just bubbled up and what emerged in dialogue. The first axis on which we discussed was actually geography, that we are people in conversation across the world, across time zones, across communities. And the other axis was time itself, history, our parents, what we ourselves grew up with, and what we hope for in the future. And what is beautiful and what was so moving is that right now in the present, we might be able to do our best learning across geographies. But what we can do for the future, that might emerge from how we approach our own past. And the challenges inherent to the relationships between our communities in the past also have embedded with history the possibility for much better going forward, the possibility for parents of the sort that Rabbi Joe reflected upon, who sing Hine Matov before going to bed, how good it is that brothers and sisters can dwell together in peace. Parents who taught us that there is so much more that we have yet to do together. Communities that have encountered their own past and the complexity therein, but are committed to continual growth. So my hope and my prayer and gratitude to everyone who spoke and to all of our participants around the world is that we continue this brave and beautiful encounter, not only with each other right here, right now, but the encounter of our predecessors, the encounter of our religious past, because together we can create a future that is filled with hope and wonder and possibility. Thank you all so much. It did feel like we were dwelling together as brothers and sisters, as people of faith from around the world. What a blessing, what a holy time, what a holy space. Amen.
Amen, indeed. Thank you very much, Rabbi Josh Stanton from HKIC, closing with his closing remarks. And thank you to all of you who have joined us for this webinar. We know it's just a beginning for many of us. For others, it is a continuation of a long series of conversations, but we continue to press on. And we look forward to have more conversations and to update you on what is happening. And we will send you an email with a recording of this session and a write-up for our conversation today. So thank you once again. If you can share with us some of your thoughts and send it to everyone, what is one thing that you have learned today for today's session, that would be very helpful for the organizers to get a sense of what you have benefited, or you may still have some questions. So please quickly put it in there so that we can have a collection of these questions and see how it can inform our work, both in the LWF as well as our colleague with HKIC. So this has been a wonderful time, and we just thank you for joining us. May God's blessing be with you all. May God's peace be with you too. God bless. Goodbye.